Hi, I'm Sean Mastretti, landscape architect, certified arborist, educator, climate activist. I am the principal and owner of Studio Petrichor. We're in Altadena, California.
And I'm Lee Adams, and I'm a consultant for Studio Petrichor. We are Team Petrichor. I'm an artist in residence at the LA County Arboretum and with Metabolic Studio in Los Angeles.
Cool. And where are we and what are we doing and what are you going to show me?
Well, we're in our home garden laboratory, and this is also where our office is. Right behind us is Studio Petrichor.
Cool.
We'll have to give you a tour of that in a minute.
Yeah.
And we are in the garden. This is our laboratory, and it wasn't until I had met this amazing purple spirit that I became even more enveloped in regenerative practices, one specifically hugelkultur, but really connecting the dots and finding those interconnected webs that support all life. This is one of our many hugels.
And this is a water optimizing technique using the hugels in conjunction with the bioswale. And Sean has very cleverly captured water off of multiple roofs around here, brought them all the way around the garden, and they come into this swale. And the beauty of this is that a swale accompanied by a hugel is a living system that grows more and more every year. It can move water and nutrients laterally. So this is exciting, and this one is, how old is this, Sean?
This one was built in January, so that's just 7-8 months ago.
And it's working beautifully.
Yeah, and the first year, what was really interesting was that the first year, this winter, what was really interesting is that this winter, when this would fill up with water, it would hold on to it. And that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. We always come across hydrophobic, compacted, desertified, compromised soils. And the beauty of this is next year, when all of the carbon, organisms, microorganisms, all of the roots start to work together, it will infiltrate faster and faster and faster.
And horizontally as well as vertically. So we're adding to the water table, the watershed, as well as supplying water and nutrients to the plants in this area.
So what's a hugel?
What's a hugel?
Oh, what's a hugel? A hugel is a construct. It is a biomimicry of what occurs in a naturally wooded area. So when a tree falls, it usually takes down a lot of mass with it. That biomass, accompanied by that large carbon trunk of the tree, begins to decay. If you watch that happen naturally, you'll see that it's not where the tree fell from, leaving an open space, but it's actually adjacent to that trunk and that biomass, because that is harvesting water. And that's done through physics. The physics of thermal mass so a big tree trunk stays cooler than air temperature. When moist air comes in at night, it condenses out of its liquid form, in a gaseous form, and into a liquid form. Our biggest problem with wood in our homes is the capillary action. It draws in moisture. Our biggest advantage with wood in the soil, capillary action. It draws in moisture. Plants then draw it out through capillary action. But there are so many advantages to this. We call it collateral advantage, the things that happen besides just in the hugel, which is a great place to plant. And what's, to us, the most exciting thing is that if you ask a kid, where can you find insects or moisture in the garden, they know to turn over a stepping stone or a log.
Or a boulder.
Or a boulder. That's where they're going to find moisture. Intuitively, they understand the laws of the universe. And then in our landscaping practices, we do exactly the opposite. So we're excited to cheerlead for hugelkultur. It's remarkable.
I just want to point out where this entire hugel gets minimal input. I only hand water, spot water, where I planted some plants recently. It gets very little water. And look at how well plants that love a little bit more water are doing just next to those logs coming out of the the edges here. Yeah, this is a variety, a dwarf variety of our aster. You know, Carex panza, a really commonly used sedge. This this was an accidental Halloween pumpkin that we left here. It decayed and sprouted, and now we have next year's pumpkin. We've got juncus, mugwort, which is extremely medicinal. This is a California fuchsia variety called Select Matol, and it likes just a little bit more water. All of the plants seem to be doing really well, but up on the top of the hugel where the drainage is the greatest, we've got white sages, western redbuds, seaside daisies, manzanitas, pink flowering sumacs, hollyleaf cherries, and toyons. So just like you would landscape from chaparral to grassland, this is like a little mini watershed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I see.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I see that you also have a observation well, or is that for?
Oh, that's overflow.
That overflow.
So we didn't want to flood the neighbors, right? So we had to connect that pipe to the street out there. So yeah, that's our overflow.
But our goal is to capture every bit of water and keep it on site.
Sure. Sure, but that's just being responsible.
That's being responsible.
This is the late stage farm hugel. We finished this hugel in mid-January and threw everything at it to see what would work. What was fascinating about this one is that it held on to so much water. It was scary to me how much water it was holding on to. So Lee said, get some sunflowers in there. And the moment those sunflowers took off, those fibrous roots activated the soil and the hugel, it drained. It started to work. So we've got nasturtiums,
Potatoes.
sections of potatoes, beets, carrots, tomatillos, sunflowers. We're throwing everything at it to see what works. Obviously, the farm hugels need a little bit more moisture support, so I water these a little bit more. And over here you can see we've got tons of winter squash just taking over the garden. We tried corn, and the mice and rats love the corn. So we've got some citrus trees, which we put in large 15-gallon containers. We built the hugels around those. So we're building hugels of all shapes and sizes and styles, and there's so many different applications.
Oh, one of the most exciting ones that you don't see here is that we can go into a schoolyard that has absolutely no place to plant, and we get to build hugels for classrooms on asphalt where they can grow healthy food just outside their classroom, and the kids can be part of that. They can learn from putting the seeds in to taking care of it, and that's available to anyone anyway.
So a situation like that needs a little bit more support, and we're hoping to propose this for the Green Schoolyards America project, is that not only are hugels and landforms such as these placemakers, they're structural, they change an environment, they increase biodiversity, and depending on the site conditions, as a landscape architect, we all know that context is everything. What might be downstream, and in the case of this one, downstream from that hugel was an old sick camellia, and just a couple months after building that, the humic acid created from water passing through that wood and draining off into that planter increased. It was collateral advantage. It increased the vitality and vigor of that plant.
In our experience, the actual community building and the children's involvement, the greater community comes in to take part in more workshops so they can do it at home and they can teach other people. It's not a hard sell once the first one is seen. And we, in our society, when we say collateral, everyone hears damage coming. And this is a system that has collateral advantage. And we keep adding up the list of collateral advantages and of creating community above ground through the people building, but also then the biodiversity, the butterflies, the birds that come in, and we are increasing the biodiversity in the soil. And that's not a hard sell. That's what we all want.
So rule of thumb. Without carbon in the soil, there is no water. Without water in the soil, there's no life. That's across the board. we keep talking about carbon like it's our enemy. Carbon is the most basic, essential building block of life. Where there's carbon in the soil, there's water, and where there's water in the soil, there's life. Life is supported by water harvesting technology. For every 1% of soil organic matter added to the soil, it increases the water holding capacity by 20,000 gallons per acre.
Okay.
That's huge, right? So let's take for an example what's going on in our community. A certain utility company is coming in and chopping down trees for fire safety. Trees are being trimmed for certain setbacks. People are killing their trees. Drought is killing our trees. High winds are killing our trees. It's all a combination, diseases and pathogens. We want to take advantage of that wood buried in the ground and allow it to harvest water both passively and actively, building healthy soil. So what I got excited about when I was talking about this just being carbon, and your comment about, well, what do we do about that if they decide they change their mind? You can move that entire mass of carbon and build another garden somewhere
So it
else.
doesn't go to waste. It's like you don't. It's like the cycle of its life is.
This hardwood is going to take a couple decades to break down. Oak is a pretty hard wood. Pine is pretty hard.
Sure.
But if we used palm trunks, that would would break down. So I don't know if Lee said this, but this is really composting in place. It's structural.
Yeah.
It looks great.
So before we go there, I just want to share with our audience. Show me how this is a retaining wall, and then show me how this is a good before and after.
Yeah, this poorly built wall when we moved into this wonderful gem of a house that we found up here in Altadena. This wall is hollow. It doesn't have any structure behind it. It's stacked. It might have a little mortar in between. Well, this one had a lot more weight and tree roots pushing against it, so it was cracking, falling apart, and it just made sense to cover it up. This is this style of hugel in our chapter of our book. When we get there, we're going to call it the cover up. We can increase height. It looks like it's a continuation of the landscape. It doesn't do any harm whatsoever, and in fact that is going to harvest water because of the thermal mass. Now there are cracks in the wall, so when it rains up here, that water moves through here.
Some like a modified weep hole situation going on.
Absolutely. Unintentional.
Unintentional weep holes.
Unintentional. And so we just planted a whole bunch of native perennials and grasses on this one because I've got a 3.5-year-old and a big dog, and they run up and down.
Yeah. So is there a way that we could utilize dog excrement with these hugels?
We have a secret method called
show us.
Pukashi.
We're testing composting dog food.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Not for growing food.
So before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about waste. I want to talk a lot about waste because there's too much of it, especially now in the time of COVID, and I want to show you some of my recycling bins up there and how I organize our waste. Plastic is poisoning our world. So the idea of me coming out here with a plastic bag, or what do I do with all this dog waste? I don't want to put it in the trash. I want to keep as much on site. So we developed this system. I took a bucket, we cut the bottom off, we wrapped some wire around it, so it's basically a long cylinder that's hollow and aerated down at the bottom half. We installed it into the hugel, and this is where we put our dog poop.
Excellent.
Now I know that doesn't look attractive because I just reloaded that to the brim after harvesting a beautiful amount of wormful soil. Wormful. It was the dog poop had become soil, was full of worms, and I mixed it up with some biochar and some leaf post, and I inoculated certain parts of my front garden with it. So this is the new batch, and we mix it with bokashi. Lee will talk a little bit about bokashi.
Okay. So thanks to the Japanese American Cultural Association here in Los Angeles, they taught me how to use bokashi, which is an anaerobic composting technique. Inside your house, you can have a small bucket and sitting inside another bucket. There are holes drilled inside the inner bucket. You put your daily food waste in there and sprinkle in a little bit of bokashi. And bokashi is the liquid probiotics saturating some form of cellulose. It could be bran flakes, it could be sawdust, it could be leaves. But you just sprinkle a bit of that in, and that has the microorganisms that will break down that food waste. As the food breaks down and deliquesces, instead of a scent, because it's inside a sealed bucket, those liquids drop down into the lower bucket. You don't smell it.
Mm-hmm.
When that has broken completely down, usually a month's worth of food is what I have at a time that I take out to the garden. I open that bottom bucket outside, and inside is a liquid that's, it does not smell good, but I've paid $32 a quart for that probiotic liquid. So instead of throwing it away, I can add water to it and fertilize my plants. I can create compost tea, or even better, I can go into my slow running drains in the house, pour that into the drains, and those microorganisms eat out the organic materials in the drains and open up the drains as a byproduct of my kitchen waste.
Right.
So exciting. So we use that bokashi technique to come up with pukashi.
As she was teaching me about that, it just made sense. I was like, well, if we create a somewhat anaerobic condition for this dog poop, and I toss some of that bran on it, let's see what happens. And it worked.
Awesome.
It took a little time, but it worked.
We experiment as much as
This is our
we
laboratory.
Sure.
Yeah. The other thing we're testing out here, if you want to hear about it,
I do.
are plant community design. And you don't see it happening down here, but we are going to be testing multiple types of low-growing perennials and grasses to grow as a community, so sort of like an open meadow. Yarrows, all different types of native grasses and non-native things, because we want to know what will blend together and support each other.
Yeah.
We're looking to create and develop sort of a template approach to these blends for low input landscapes. So landscapes that don't rely on as much water, that rely on the water harvesting, the passive and active water harvesting of a hugelkultur. But one of the other things that we did here, you don't realize you're standing on it, it was about 10 inches of lasagna mulching. Cardboard. I keep talking about trash.
Yeah.
And we're overloaded with trash. Cardboard is not being recycled. It's carbon. It can be transformed into soil. So this right now is transforming. The amount of trash that goes into the bottom of these, old pants, old towels, things that you would normally throw into the dump. So anyway, we're building healthy soil and getting a good layer of topsoil here before we start testing plant communities in this area.
Okay, let me give you our approach to the cardboard, because cardboard is our invitation to mycorrhizal fungi. And if you have kids, you know, if you offer kids healthy breakfast cereal on steel cut oats or sugary breakfast cereal, you know what your kids are going to choose. The same is with mycorrhizal fungi. We lay down cardboard and mycorrhizal fungi will inhabit that in a quick minute. Why? Because it's ground up cellulose. They don't have to chew that bark or those trees. And the glue in the cardboard is metabolized as a sugar. So mycorrhizal fungi, that cardboard is the invitation to have them flourish in the garden and be supported by these techniques, and in turn support us.
That's our Brazilian pepper tree. We got super lucky with this one. Normally,
What's the botanical name?
Shinus terebinthifolius. Please forgive me if I massacred that one. Fellow arborists out there. Normally, this tree would be a tree that I would chop up, turn into mulch, put into a hugel. But this one happened to be really old.
Beautiful.
Have
Look at that
lots of character.
structure.
And we maintain its suckers.
How old do you think this is? It's got to be
I'd probably say it was
40,
planted
50?
at the time that this house was built, which is 47.
Yeah.
Same with this oak. Yeah.
Yeah, easy, right?
Yeah.
And then we have a beautiful oak here as well.
So the evaporative cooling that comes from our 3 big trees on our property helps to keep our cooling bills down.
And is this how you graded?
This is exactly how we did it. This is the machine that we broke in the process.
So it took a while, but it looks great.
The Shosugi-ban fence over there is that's another way of treating wood with fire, to harden with fire, to make it more water resistant, bug resistant, weather resistant, and water resistant. Shosugi-ban.
From Japanese.
It's a Japanese technique. They gave it a name, but hardening with fire has been used around the world.
Yes.
They just seem to have perfected it.
Well, as Japanese tend to do.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so it goes beyond an aesthetic functionality. It's actually, it's
I
almost...
personally am not a fan of the color black. I'm a color man.
Sure.
I love color.
Yeah.
But we live in a high fire risk area.
Right.
And fence lines between properties ignite.
Yes.
We also have roof sprinklers up here.
Brilliant.
It's something to invest in. They may not always work, but if you invest $1,500 in putting them in, and there's a wildfire coming and you have a chance
Flip
of
it on.
soaking your property down, you might save yourself a whole lot of heartache and a whole lot of money.
And with today's technology, you could even set it up so you could turn it on remotely or with a thermostat.
If
or
the
with
Wi-Fi and the electricity is working, I can go straight from my phone. Thank you to Hunter Irrigation.
Yeah.
HydroWise app.
Yeah.
And we are going to paint the valve red. And if it needs to be turned on manually, we can do that. So everything not everything, but what we've been showing you are just pieces of this interconnected puzzle that we as landscape architects and planners and designers have a fantastic opportunity to implement. But it starts with, what are the problems? We do our site analysis, our site inventory. What are the problems on the site? And most of the time we focus on, well, what are the human needs? Without even giving respect to, what does Mother Nature need? So if you start your analysis process by, all right, what is going on in the ground here? What is going on in the soil? And that's where we start. We always start with soil. We have to, because that's the matrix of all life, when you think about it.
We also try and look at every project, every property for the resources that are already there. If we're going to be taking out some concrete or creating permeable concrete, what can we do with that concrete?
You're going to create urbanite, or you're going to...
Yes.
And repurpose it. We have to regrade it. Well, we got all this, soil. When soil has to get taken off of a site, well, guess what? You can landform with that. When you increase when you landform, you increase the square footage. You increase the cubic yardage of a site, which increases its biodiversity.
Lately, there's been a lot of critique on the Eurocentric view of landscape architecture that is infiltrated our whole entire industry. What are your thoughts on...
Are you referring to decolonizing the landscape?
Yeah. What does that mean?
That means starting with indigenous wisdom. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because we start every project and everything we do and every collaboration with how would our indigenous ancestors have done this. We're on Gabrielino land, and it has been disrespected. We love to look at hugelkultur as one massive gift back to the soil. All right, here, even though it was not an indigenous practice, I want to be very clear about that, but it is a massive gift of carbon for water harvesting and soil building to bring life, vibrancy, biodiversity, and health back to the landscape.
Dimension, to get rid of this footprint, the artifact of the lawnmower having graded and flattened everything and taking away the topsoil. We're bringing that back and sculpting the land so that it can harvest and hold more water, infiltrate more water.
Yeah.
The architecture and the spaces that we design happen with that. so that we create an embrace. When our clients are in their garden, our goal is to get them to stay in their garden.
Yeah.
And we've won. We've won that. We've achieved that every single time. But I wanted to just share a couple of things. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, tells us that the land is the real teacher, and all we need as students is mindfulness. So we need to bring mindfulness to this climate. And there was another one. It's coming to me.
Leela Darwish of
There was this one. It was when it comes to decolonizing the landscape or our lives or our minds, even though it wasn't our fault, we can take responsibility. And this is us taking it further, trying to be as thoughtful and open.
Reversing the sins of our father in a way.
We have to acknowledge it, though. We have to take accountability. We have to sit with the poison. As a dear friend just told us, we have to sit with the poison that's been in our DNA for so long. We have to acknowledge that it's there before we can move forward.
Yes, we were working with Gabrielino elders on our practices, on our thoughts, on our approaches, honoring the traditions, honoring the ancestors, honoring the land and the water, and attempting to make amends with everything we do.
And it's a lifestyle change.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle change. I'd like to think that we're being sought out. And with the amount of education that we provided last year and output, if you will, COVID came along and kind of threw a wrench in the gears of everything, which is unfortunate. But we also have to acknowledge that Mother Nature threw us this curveball because she's enforcing us to slow down, right? So we want to collaborate with other firms. We want to collaborate with architects, the planners, everybody who's doing this. We want to be working on those big projects with you. We're a boutique firm. We're a very humble boutique firm, and we do mostly residential, but we're now working with the community of Pasadena Water and Power. And it's growing, it's coming.
We get to teach community how to do those things. And I've personally trained 33 county agencies, made a difference in their practices, and we hope to do many more communities. That's really what we want to do, is municipalities, so that we reach more people. We love doing
and our workshops are fun.
Workshops are fun. So fun.
Yeah. Another thing I do want to mention is that in the realm of where we are in decolonizing our minds, landscape design has been about landscape control. So it's important to
elaborate on that. What is
it's really important
control?
To acknowledge that when you think about the terms stewardship, management. They are all a top-down controlled approach. When we look at classic landscape architecture, we look at a lot of we're trying to control the landscape. We've been trying to control Mother Nature since
the Roman grid.
Since the Roman grid or before
so
that.
Maybe instead of stewardship, maybe it's accentuation or relationships.
This is another bit of indigenous wisdom, that we need to develop relationships with the land. And one of our dear friends said to us, I quote, "You people plant your native landscapes or your landscapes, and then you just look at them."